Now, this issue, of course, has been reported and reflected on around the world. In Australia last night, in the streets of Sydney, there was a protest on the Black Lives Matter theme, and, of course, they linked in the terrible problems of Indigenous deaths in custody and incarceration rates and the like. And, coincidentally, in the last 48 hours, an issue was broken out in Sydney over the arrest of a young Indigenous teenager and the way he was treated by police. That's led to a police investigation. I'm joined now by Greens Upper House member in New South Wales, David Shoebridge, who's been working on this issue today. Thanks for joining us, David. You've been in touch with the family of the Aboriginal man arrested in Australia who are looking for justice here. Are you not happy with the fact that the Police Commissioner has suggested that this might have been a little heavy-handed, the treatment of this teenager, and we'll see the video of that in a second. Also the fact that the officer has been stood down while an investigation is carried out.
Well, Chris, no, because the Police Commissioner also said that the police officer was just having, I think to quote the Police Commissioner, a bad day. And then he also preempted the investigation by saying that he hoped, and he's the boss of the police force, that he hoped that the investigation will not end with the dismissal of the police officer. You know, that's the problem that the Aboriginal community especially has of police investigating police. It's a done deal when it starts. And yes, he's taken off, I think, working out on the street, but he's still on full pay. He hasn't been charged with assault. And he's still working as a police officer in that same police station. So, no, Chris, I don't think I'm satisfied. But more importantly, the family and the Aboriginal community isn't satisfied.
Look, we've all seen the vision, though. We can see what's happened here, and the youth, we hear in that video that he threatens the police officer. The officer goes to handcuff him and put him on the ground, obviously goes down heavier than he perhaps expected, and it's quite a thump to the ground. We can see exactly what transpired.
Well, that's how you characterise it, Chris. Actually, what happened was the police officer held the young man's hand. He's a 16-year-old boy, right?
Yeah.
He hadn't committed a crime. The police had been circling the park repeatedly. But anyhow, he hadn't committed any crime. He hasn't been charged with anything. The police officer grabbed his hands behind his back and then flipped his feet from underneath him, so he landed face down on the pavement.
Yep.
In what is, I think, unquestionably a brutal assault. If anybody else did that in their workplace, they would be charged immediately by the police. But because it was a police officer, no charges. No charges.
Well, we can see it, and there is an investigation by the police, and we'll wait and see what comes from that. As I say, I would have thought the Police Commissioner himself has almost prejudged that in his public comments today by suggesting that was heavy-handed, that he shouldn't have gone that far.
And he's prejudged the conclusion and said the police officer will not be dismissed. That means there will be no charges laid, because if he was prosecuted for assault, then one of the inevitable consequences of that would be dismissed. The Police Commissioner, far from having an independent inquiry, has already destroyed any credibility of the police investigation. We can't have police investigating police in these situations, and today's actions by the Police Commissioner proves why, Chris.
Now, also at a media event today with the family, you brought up what was happening in the US, and you kneeled in solidarity with the protests in the US?
Yeah, I did. That was led by the young man's father, you know, a strong, proud First Nations man. And he called upon us to do that, and of course I joined in solidarity with the family. And I think all of us, I mean, I hear yourself, Chris, we all join in solidarity with what's happening in the United States, to that ongoing, you know, oppression that we're seeing of African Americans. And I think we've all felt that, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we've all felt that, and we all want to see justice in America, and we need to see progress in America. What concerns me is that we're using this incident of this teenager where we can see exactly what transpired. We might be inflating this and putting too much pressure and talking about brutal assaults on the police officer and charges, trying to create some of the same sorts of divisions and tensions that, of course, are so damaging in the US.
Well, Chris, what the family said very clearly today is they want protests to be peaceful. But they also said that their lived experience as First Nations Australians means that this kind of action is commonplace for the parents when they were kids, and throughout their adult life. For the sister, it's part of what being Aboriginal in Australia means. And, you know, you and I might think this video is shocking, but when you talk to First Nations Australians, this is part of their lived reality. That's why they're demanding, finally, people look at it and realise we have a systemic racial bias in our criminal justice system, and it starts with the police.
Now, we can't name the teenager because he is a minor, of course, but can you tell us about his condition and where he's at the moment?
Well, I mean, I haven't spoken with him directly. I've spoken with his parents. That, you know, anyone would be shocked if that had happened to them, and feel anxious and frightened about their interactions with police. But you know, I'm not the person to speak to find out how a 16-year-old Aboriginal boy feels after being assaulted by the police in his local park. I'd ask anybody to think, you know, if that was their kid, if they'd gone to their local park. They may have been, you know, they may have had some verbal aggression to the police, but if the response had been that the police had held their hands behind their back, flipped them face down into the concrete, and then not charged them with anything, just if that was your kid, and if that was the experience that you'd seen happen constantly in your community, how would you be feeling about that?
David, thanks so much for joining us again.
Cheers, Chris.